but we got a good military and we can take down governments. And he said, I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail. So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
Mr. President, I think that drawing inspiration from history in this chamber is an extremely important exercise. Invoking examples from the cultures and traditions of peoples and nations is a critical asset. I am saying these words and I am recalling in this context the literary masterpiece written by the German man of letters Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. And the title of that masterpiece was Dr. Faustus. It is a novel that speaks in symbolic terms on the risks inherent in the fact that a person, any person who might be very wise, by selling his soul to Satan. This symbolic story almost captures what I would like to prelude my full statement at, namely that a human being should not sell his or her soul to Satan in return for supposed gains that could bring destruction of that person's hope for freedom down the road later. My delegation, Mr. President, has examined the text of the draft resolution put before this August Council. Given our firm belief in the pan-Arab role, we had hoped that the examination of the question of Syria would have remained first exclusively in the Syrian household and then in the larger supporting Arab structure. But the rush by some parties to invite international intervention, which we know in advance the objectives of its dealing with Arab issues, first and foremost the question of Palestine and the Israeli occupation of Arab territories, is a cause for concern. It is indeed a cause for sadness, deep sadness for the regrettable state of affairs that we now find ourselves now. At this point, Mr. President, I would like to quote in English a sentence which was said some 22 years ago, said by the former United States Attorney General, Mr. Ramsey Clark. He said, and I quote, "Which was created to prevent the scourge of war, has become an instrument of war." My delegation has followed with full appreciation the efforts made by the advocates in this Council for the rights of people and the Charter of the United Nations, as well as its objectives and purposes, especially the inadmissibility of intervention in the internal affairs of countries and waging wars against those countries in order to gain exclusive control of their geographical location as well as their lucrative natural resources, and the resolution of Western power economic problems at the expense of the peoples of the developing nations. For those states that safeguard international peace and security, we wish to express our deep gratitude and the annals of history would record these noble positions for them. Isn't it strange, Mr. President, that this Security Council has adopted over a period of 45 years, i.e. since its creation in 1945 until 1988, depended or adopted only 690 resolutions. And in the following 20 years, the Security Council adopted 3 times this number, 3 times of resolutions. This is an indicator that the current world is less secure, less just, less fair, and that the provisions of the Charter of the United Nations are under severe threats. I would like to stress, Mr. President, in this context, that the Syrian Arab Republic, which is a founding member of this world organization, has been targeted by some powers to punish it as a result of its commitment to international legality, especially in areas of defending the rights of people. Today, Syria is a sacrifice of a crisis manufactured by parties that do not want good for Syria and its people, by the support given by these parties in terms of money and arms and favorable media coverage to armed terrorist groups that kill, abduct, and intimidate Syrian citizens, and destroying and sabotaging the infrastructure, including power generation equipment, oil and gas pipelines, premises of the Ministry of Justice, railroads. Mr. President, is there a sensible person who would believe that a given government would commit massacres in a given city on a day when the Security Council is scheduled to hold a meeting to examine the situation in that country? Would any entity put itself in such a position? The most convincing proof of the criminal nature of these groups, Mr. President, are the acts committed today, this morning, that killed and destroyed lives of innocent people, homes, buildings of Syrian embassies in many capitals, supported by media campaigns. All that is taking place in order to send out a misleading message that would influence this August Council in order to sway the positions of the decision makers in this Council on the draft resolution. The best proof of our good intentions, Mr. President, and our good faith in dealing with the League of Arab States is what is contained in the report of the observers of the League of Arab States. What is really strange is that you have not examined that report in due time for reasons known to all of you. That report has confirmed that Syria has fulfilled its obligations under the protocol. Here, once, twice, for the third time and fourth time, let me stress that if killing ceased and those who pay lip service to democracy cease to implement the design planned against Syria, and if those states that provide generous funds, billions of dollars to the armed groups and providing them with the most recent weapons and means of communication, and host them in their capitals in order to facilitate their criminal acts against the Syrian people and their property. Without all that, Syria would have fulfilled the Arab League plan of action and the relevant protocol under that plan. Some Arab Gulf states, Mr. President, have dragged the League of Arab States to the Security Council with a view to leverage the power of this council against Syria and to internationalize a pure Arab issue contrary to the provisions of the Charter of the League of Arab States, despite the fact that from the beginning of the crisis, all Arab politicians in their League of Arab States, all of them were competing among themselves in order to stress that they are not seeking the internationalization of the crisis in Syria. The report of the observer mission that I mentioned has stressed that Syria has fulfilled its obligations despite the acts of violence. Let me quote to this council paragraph 73 of that report. Quote, "The mission noted that the government of Syria strived to help it succeed in its task and remove any barriers that might stand in its way. The government of Syria also facilitated meetings with all parties. No restrictions were placed on the movement of the mission and its ability to interview Syrian citizens, both those who opposed the government and those loyal to it." End of quotation. Mr. President, some 2.5 months ago, the Qatari Al Jazeera satellite channel broadcast from Doha a political program hosted by a well-known anchor. The two guests hosted in that program, the current Tunisian president, but at that time he was not the president, and a Syrian political activist. In that program, Mr. President, 2.5 months ago, the host of the program said, speaking to the current Tunisian president, "Don't ask me about the sources of my information, but I have received this information from high levels in Doha. And that information says that the Syrian regime will change on the 22nd of January, i.e. the very same day when the League of Arab States met in Cairo and took a decision to come to this council."
The African Union has condemned France for supplying weapons to Libyan rebels. Its chief said the move threatens to put the entire region at risk. On Wednesday, France became the first NATO country to openly admit to arming tribal fighters for striving to topple Colonel Gaddafi. Rebels have recently been making gains and hope to advance on Tripoli. But for more on this, we're joined now by John Laughlin, the Director for the Institute of Democracy and Cooperation in Paris. Thanks for joining us here on RT. France is once again at the forefront of NATO's campaign in Libya, now airdropping weapons to the rebels. Some analysts say the move contravenes the UN embargo on arms supplies to Libya. What's your take on that?
Well, obviously it does, and it also